Hi everyone, Heather Gershinsky here with another tutorial for you. This tutorial is actually another Google Docs tutorial, and this one I'm actually going to show you a few more advanced features than the other tutorials that I've done before. And to show you those, I'm actually going to show you how to make a newsletter using Google Docs, because I know that's something that a lot of teachers tend to do. So I'm going to get started with that. What I've done here is I've actually typed up all my newsletter content for you. So I just kind of quick typed up a few paragraphs about each subject that I teach, and now I'm going to show you how to format it. So the first step would actually be to type up the content, and then you can always edit things later. So the first thing I'm actually going to show you is the spell checker. So I've noticed here that I intentionally spelt my last name wrong in several different places, because that's another function that I'm going to show you later. But as far as spell check goes, it's very similar to any other spell check you've probably used. You can, of course, right click, and it's going to give you suggestions. Now it knows my name because I've typed it enough, but I'm going to ignore that for now. And I'm just going to search through and look for any of the underlined red, and I spelled the word therefore wrong, so I'm going to go ahead and right click, and it says, oh, did you mean this spelling? And I'm going to select it. So I can change it that way. So that's just a quick review of that. Most of you have probably used it already, but just the first thing I want to do is check through my spelling, make sure everything looks correct. The next thing I'm going to show you is how to actually format this into a newsletter. One of the complaints that I get about Google Docs over Microsoft Word is that Google Docs doesn't really let you do columns. And I know that that's a big thing when you want to format your newsletter to make it look, like a standard newsletter. You want columns. So I'm going to show you a little workaround and a way to create columns using the table function in Google Docs. So what I'm going to do is for my newsletter, I want my title of my newsletter to be in the center, and I want it pretty big because I want that to stand out, because that's the name of my newsletter. So I'm going to change that to a font 30, and again, just like I showed you in some of the other tutorials, you can play with the font. I'm going to use Comic Sans because it's kind of a fun different kind of font. And then what I want two columns. I want one column for my What's New in Science section, and then I want a separate column for my What's New in Geography section. So to do that, I'm going to put my cursor before any of my text, and I'm going to insert a table, and I just want two columns. So I'm just going to do a 2 by 1, and it's going to look like this when you first start. So what you do is you select the text that you want in your first column, which again, I just want the What's New in Science. And if I highlight it all, I can actually just drag it right into there, and it's going to move it for me. And you'll see that that looks really nice. And then I'm going to do the same thing with Geography, but I'm going to put that into the other column, or the other table that I have. And sometimes when you get it on 2 pages, it gets a little bit picky. So let's see if it's going to let me move it. There we go. All right, so now I've got my text copied. And what I like is that it's all on one page, because I typically don't want a newsletter that's too much more than that. So if I backspace, it actually brings me back to one page. Okay, so now this is just a very rough outline of what it looks like. I want my What is Science to also stand out, because it's like the heading for that section. So I'm going to go ahead and resize that. And again, this is just stuff that you can play around with on your own once you get all the information entered in there. I'm going to center What is Geography as well, change that size to 18 as well, and Comic Sans, because that's kind of fun. Now I don't like how it made What's New in Geography onto 2 different ones, so I'm going to go to the table and the properties, and I'm going to actually make the column width, let's just say about 3.5 inches for both of them. And that's going to spread it out a little bit. There we go. So that looks nice. So now they're on both of them. And actually, I think it only changed that column. So let me do the same for here. I could tell that it wasn't quite even. There we go. And now I'm also going to actually change my margins, because as you can see, this is a lot smaller of a margin than this one, so it's going to print kind of unevenly. So if I actually go and change my margins, like I showed you in one of the other tutorials, to 1/2 inch margin, then it should fit hopefully a little bit better. Alright, so now I'm going to actually size this to fit, move this slider over too, and now that looks pretty good. So it has about the same margin on both sides. They both take up about the same amount of space. So I like how that looks. That looks really clean now. Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to add some pictures. I'm going to add some pictures for my science that I took during some of the things that I talked about, and I'm also going to add a picture for geography. So I'm going to put my mouse my cursor where I want to put my picture, And then as I showed you in the other tutorials, I'm going to insert my images, which I've actually saved to my computer. So here's my first one, and it does take a little bit to upload, especially if you're pulling it off your computer. If it's one that you have on your drive already, it might be a little bit faster, so that's an option too. You can of course use any of the other options, like by URL if you want to use like a picture from the internet. You can take a snapshot if you're using a picture of yourself, like I showed you in the other tutorials. So we'll go ahead and see how that works. Alright, so now that looks great, but it's kind of big. It's actually taking up a lot of space. So I'm going to actually click on it and make it a little smaller just by dragging the corners. And I don't like how it leaves this white space here, so if that's the inline where it's actually going to put it in there between the text. If I wrap the text, then it actually looks kind of nice if I move it around to make it look the way I want it to. You can also change the margin, so right now it's 1/8 of an inch. You can make it smaller or bigger if you want to. I'm going to actually make it 1/16 to fit a little bit better text on there. If I break text, I'm just going to show you that really quickly. It's going to let you move it around, but it's going to have all this white space, which I tend to like the wrap text look a little bit better. So there's one picture I've got in there. I do have a second picture that I'm going to put in there. So I'm just going to do the same as I did right now, where I just put my cursor kind of where I want it to go. You can move it later. And then I'm going to insert an image. I'm going to choose it from my computer again. This is a different picture, a different group of students working on the same project that I talked about in my newsletter section for science. And again, that just takes a minute to upload, especially if it's a bigger picture. I took these pictures using my phone pictures. Alright, there we go. And again, it put it in there nice and neatly, but I'm going to make it smaller. And I'm going to wrap it again because I like the way that looks. And I'm going to put it down here so that we've got some room. Change the margin. I like the 1/16 look a little bit better. And there we go. So now I have my pictures in there. I'm going to really quickly just add a picture for geography for you. Insert an image from my geography class. And in this particular column, I talked about some props that my students brought in for an activity. And so that's the picture that I'm just uploading here. Again, I'm going to resize it. And I wrap the text because I like that. Now, this happened to me before. If I move it, it actually fixes it. I don't know, it just tended to move behind there for some reason. So if I move it, though, it looks pretty good. Alright, so you can move it to wherever looks best on your particular newsletter. And then I can also justify this. Now, most newspaper articles, the text is justified, meaning that it lines up perfectly with the ends. So I can do that if that's something that looks nice. The only problem I have is once I put pictures in, it tends to make a lot of really strange looking gaps, like here and here. But you can do that if that's something you're interested in, is to justify it, to make it look more like a legitimate newspaper article. But because of the weird spacing, I don't usually do that. I usually just leave it left aligned. Alright, so that's just the basics of how to add pictures again into the paragraphs. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is how to make this a little bit more fun. You might recall that if you go to the page setup, you can actually change the background color of your page. And so if this is something you're not printing, if it's just something you're putting on your website for people to look at, it's really cool to actually add some color and make it look a little more fun. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to make the background of it purple. And then you can change your text colors, of course, to look really neat, to be kind of an accent to that. And just jazz it up just a little bit. So that's what that looks like to do the page in the background. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, this looks great, except that there's these big lines all the way around, and it shows it's a table instead of columns, where columns, it's just a break in the text. So let me show you how to get rid of that. If you go to your table properties, your table border right now is black, which is why it's showing up. So you can actually change it to the color that your background is, and it'll disappear. So I can show you that really quickly. And you can also make this bigger. So if you want more space in between your two columns, this is kind of the place to do it. So I do like to have a lot of area in between. So there we go. Now it's disappeared. It actually just made it the same color as the background, so now you can't see it. So that's kind of your workaround for columns. The only thing that this doesn't do, that Word does, is if you had columns in Word and you kept typing at the bottom of your first column here, it would jump up to your second column. But if you look, I'll just type some random stuff in here. What'll happen if you eventually type enough text is it goes on to a second page. So that's the only downfall with doing it this way. But you could definitely play around with the text and just go into this column, type, and then when you get to the second page, you would just keep going. So you can certainly get around it, but that's just one of the downfalls, I guess, that it does not have. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you find and replace. And now this is really good if you have one particular word that you know you spelled wrong several times. So for my example, a lot of people spell my last name wrong because it's complicated. And so I intentionally, like I said, spelled it wrong in several places. I spelled it wrong here, and I spelled it wrong here and here, and here. So you can go to Edit, and if you use the Find and Replace function, you can find it by, I'm going to find the way I spelled it before. Oops. And if you, I'm going to capitalize it here just because that's how I did it before. And I'm going to change it to SKI instead of SKY. And I'm going to replace all. And then if I get rid of this, here it is. It's replaced, and now it is spelled correctly in all those places. So that's kind of a neat function to very quickly change one word that you've spelled wrong. Usually it tends to be names that I do that with. If I spell a name wrong, I can quickly go back and change that. The next thing I'm going to show you is in my particular newsletter here, I put in some formulas that we're using in science. And so this is actually really good for math people too, is using the subscript and superscript. So here the formula is kinetic energy equals 0.5 times mass times velocity square. And the square, I don't want it to just say V2, I want it to actually look like the squared function. So if I go to edit, or I'm sorry, format, I can make it superscript, which means it's going to take the 2 and make it smaller in the top corner, or I can make it subscript, which is down in the bottom. So those are great for math people if you're, creating a test in Google Docs that you need to use those functions for. So just another cool thing that I wanted to show you all. The last thing I want to show you today is how to link something. So at the bottom of my newsletter I say, to see more, check out Mrs. Garshinsky's webpage. And then I wrote the webpage here, which is really hard to see, especially with the blue text here. So what I'm going to do is, what I wanted to say is check out Mrs. Garshinsky's webpage, or I could also say click here to check out Mrs. Garshinsky's webpage, and I want the words click here to actually be able to click on and go to that. So what I need to do first is copy the page that I want it to go to. I'm just going to Control C to copy it, and then I'm going to go to the text that I want the click here. And now if I click this link button and I paste in the web page, there it is. So now I can actually delete this. And if a parent were to click here, it will actually pull it up as a separate web page. So all they have to do is actually click there. I just think that looks kind of nice, especially with, with my web page, the way that it looks. If you look at this link, it's kind of got a lot of different extensions. So especially if you have a really long link, that's going to look a little bit nicer if you just kind of link it into there directly. And I could change this color because that blue is really hard to read. So if I actually just maybe make it orange or something, there, now they can read it a little bit better. So it's going to default to blue as a link, but you can change that, of course, just like any other text that you can change in Google Docs. I hope you learned something new today. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at garshinskyh@portage.k12.wi.us, or you can find me on the staff directory webpage. Thanks for watching.